There is a small plastic tube sitting in a drawer in millions of homes right now. You spit into it once, you mailed it off, you forgot about it. But that tube held the most personal thing you will ever own, the code that makes you, you. In 2021, the company that collected those tubes was worth about $6 billion at its peak. By March 2025, that same company had filed for bankruptcy, and your DNA had landed on the auction block. So how does a company sitting on the genetic data of 15 million people run out of money? The short answer is the one nobody wanted to say out loud. You were never the customer, you were the product. And when the trust ran out, there was nothing left to sell except you. Chapter 1. The Spit That Built a $6 Billion Promise. For a few years, spitting into a tube felt like the future. The pitch was simple and brilliant. Send us your saliva. Pay about $99 and we will read your ancestry, your traits, and your health risks. The company that perfected this was 23andMe, co-founded in 2006 by Anne Wojcicki, along with Linda Avey and Paul Kusenza. By the early 2020s, it had turned a science lab procedure into a holiday gift. The numbers tell you how far that idea traveled. More than 15 million people around the world sent in their DNA. The little saliva kit showed up under Christmas trees, on store shelves, and in national TV ads. For a moment, it looked like 23andMe had cracked something huge. Then came the money moment. In 2021, the company went public through a shortcut to the stock market called SPAC. SPAC is just a ready-made shell company you merge into, so you can skip the slow road to going public. That deal valued 23andMe at about $3.5 billion, and within weeks, its market value soared past $6 billion. On paper, Anne Wojcicki had built one of the hottest companies in Silicon Valley. She was the rare thing in biotech, a famous founder with a name people recognized and a story the public actually understood. The promise she sold was bigger than a single test. It was the idea that ordinary people deserved to read their own biology. That promise had a hidden engine though, and almost nobody at the kitchen table understood how it worked. The $99 you paid for the kit was never where the real money was supposed to come from. The real prize was the database. 15 million genetic profiles in one place was a resource a drug company would pay a fortune to study. In 2018, the drug maker, GSK, signed a deal to do exactly that, working with the data of customers who had agreed to join its research. It was a gold rush, except the gold was not the test. The gold was the people who took it. Picture millions of cold little saliva tubes feeding one $6 billion vault, all of it built on the trust of people named Maria and James who just wanted to know where their grandparents came from. That was the dream. The problem is that the dream had a crack in it from the very first day, and the crack had nothing to do with hackers. Chapter 2. The crack was always in the business model. Here is the flaw that no marketing budget could fix. You only spit once. A genetic test is the rare product you buy a single time in your entire life. Your DNA does not change, so once you have your results, you never need to buy again. That is the opposite of how a healthy, modern company makes money. The businesses that win today live on payments that come back month after month. The company did try to fix this. It bolted on memberships and health services to bring in steady money, but the heart of the business, the kit itself, was still a one-time sale. So growth depended on finding new people willing to spit, and by the early 2020s, the well was running dry. The curious early adopters had already bought in. The company's revenue started sliding instead of climbing. By the second quarter of its 2025 fiscal year, revenue had fallen to about $44.1 million, down from $50 million a year earlier. In that single quarter, the company lost $59.1 million. A company built on a one-time purchase was quietly starving. Then came the day the foundation cracked. In October 2023, the breach hit. Attackers got into about 14,000 accounts. They did not break into 23andMe's systems. They simply used passwords people had reused from other websites that were already hacked. But one feature linked users to their genetic relatives, and that spread the damage to roughly 6.9 million people. That data was as personal as it gets, and unlike a password, you cannot change it. For a company whose entire business rested on trust, this was not a technical glitch. This was the foundation giving way. 23andMe later agreed to settle the lawsuits that followed, in a fund that grew to as much as $50 million. The lead plaintiff in the class action summed up the public mood in 6 plain words, saying it scared the hell out of me. Think about what that breach really broke. The plan was to convince millions more people to hand over their DNA so the company could sell research access to drug makers. But that plan only works if people believe their genetic code is safe. Overnight, 6.9 million reasons to doubt that landed in the headlines. The slow fade and the sudden shock arrived at the same time. The product people buy only once was finally running out of new buyers. At the very same moment, the trust the whole model needed walked out the door. A starving company with broken trust is a company looking for a miracle, and 23andMe was sure it had one. It didn't. Chapter 3: 4 Forces That Drained the Tank. By 2024, 23andMe was burning through cash, and 4 forces were draining the tank at once. Its cash had dropped from about $216 million in the spring of 2024 to roughly $127 million by that fall. The first force was the one we just met. No repeat sales meant no steady money coming in, so the company was always chasing the next new customer. The second force was the bet that was supposed to save everything. 23andMe poured money into developing its own drugs, trying to turn all that genetic data into medicine it could sell. It was a bold idea, but drug development takes about a decade and swallows cash the entire time, and the company did not have a decade of cash. In November 2024, it gave up. 23andMe shut down the drug division and laid off about 40% of its staff, more than 200 people, in one brutal cost-cutting move meant to save roughly $35 million a year. The third force was the cruelest, because it was a trap of the company's own making. The escape plan was to lean harder into selling data access to drug partners, but that plan needed public trust, and the 2023 breach had just set that trust on fire. The company was trying to cash in on the one thing it had just proven it could not fully protect. The fourth force sat at the very top. Anne Wojcicki held a special class of shares that counted for 10 votes each. That gave her nearly half of all the voting power, enough to block any deal she did not want, and she said plainly she was not open to outside bids. Then came the signal nobody could spin. In September 2024, all 7 of the company's independent board directors resigned on the same day, saying they disagreed with her on where the company was headed. When your entire independent board quits at once, that is not a disagreement. That is an alarm. Now, watch how the 4 forces locked together. The one-time product stopped bringing in cash, so the company leaned on the data sale plan to survive. But the breach had poisoned the trust that plan depended on, and the founder's grip on control blocked the outside money that might have bought time to fix any of it. Each problem fed the next, until there was no door left open. It is worth pausing on the road not taken, because someone walked it. Ancestry started in that same DNA kit market, but it had something 23andMe never built: a subscription business, charging customers year after year for historical records and family trees. Different finish. One built a reason to come back, the other sold a test you would only ever buy once. By early 2025, 23andMe had run out of forces it could fight, and only one move was left. Chapter 4: Your DNA on the auction block. On March 23, 2025, 23andMe filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Anne Wojcicki resigned as chief executive that same day, though she kept a seat on the board. Months earlier, its stock had already collapsed more than 95%, and the company had done a reverse split just to stay on the Nasdaq. The $6 billion unicorn was now a company being taken apart for parts. That is where this story stops being about a stock price and starts being about you. Because in a bankruptcy, a company sells its assets, and the most valuable thing 23andMe owned was its database, the genetic information of about 15 million people. Your DNA was now inventory. The picture that captured it was small and ordinary. Somewhere in your house, that saliva tube you forgot about years ago was suddenly attached to a court case. A stranger was deciding what your genetic code was worth. A customer, we'll call Maria, spit into a kit back in 2019 just to find her birth grandparents. Now, her most private data sat in a corporate fire sale she never agreed to. The reaction told you how raw the nerve was. A coalition of 28 state attorneys general sued to block the sale. Several others urged customers to log in and delete their data before it could change hands. Congress held hearings about what it would mean for an unknown buyer to own the DNA of millions of Americans. For the first time, the country stared straight at a gap it had ignored for years. You might assume a health privacy law protects this kind of data. The one most people know is HIPAA, and HIPAA usually does not cover a direct-to-consumer DNA company at all. Then came the bids. The drug maker Regeneron was named the winning bidder in May 2025 with an offer of about $256 million. But the story was not over. The bidding was reopened, and Anne Wojcicki came back through a non-profit she had set up called 23andMe. It won the assets with a bid of about $305 million, and the deal closed in July 2025. Sit with that for a second. A $6 billion dream. The celebrated founder, all of it, sold off for a cold $305 million. That is a nickel on the dollar. The data the country was panicking about went right back to the woman who had collected it. That is the strange, quiet ending. There was no dramatic shutdown and no vanished brand. There was just a company stripped down to its one real asset and sold at a fraction of its old worth. And 15 million people learned all at once that their DNA had a price tag they never set. If you think this is only a story about one biotech company, the last chapter is the part that should make you check your own drawer. Chapter 5. When the product is you. Strip away the DNA, and 23andMe is a story you have heard before. A service signs up millions of people. It collects something valuable from each of them. Then it plans to make its real money later by selling access to all that pooled information. The pattern is familiar from the free apps on your phone. The twist with 23andMe is that you paid for the privilege of becoming the product. The kit was the visible product. The real prize was the database underneath it, the genetic and health data of millions of consenting customers. You have lived inside some version of this model your whole digital life, in your search history, your location data, and your social feeds. 23andMe just made it impossible to look away, because the data in question was your actual biology. So the practical question is what you can do. And there are a few things you can do right now. If you ever sent in a kit, log into your account and look at exactly what you agreed to. Pay attention to the one line about whether your data can be used for research. If you no longer want it stored, you can request that your genetic data be deleted and your saliva sample destroyed. These are not dramatic acts. They are the equivalent of finally reading the last page of a contract you signed years ago, and almost nobody does it. The bigger habit is simpler still. Before you hand over something permanent, ask one question. If this company disappears tomorrow, who ends up holding what I gave them? A password you can change, a credit card you can cancel. Your DNA is forever. That single line separates this collapse from every other corporate failure. When a retailer dies, the shelves empty and the lights go off. When a data company dies, the data does not vanish. It can become just another asset in a sale, and you often find out after the deal is done. 23andMe's customers were told to trust that the company could safeguard the most personal information they owned. The company could not even safeguard itself. And here is the macro picture that outlives the brand. More and more services are quietly collecting permanent, intimate data on millions of people. The rules for what happens to that data when a company goes under are thin and patchy. 23andMe became one of the clearest examples yet, because the data on the table was not your browsing history, it was your DNA. The tube in your drawer is empty now. The data it carried is not. And the next company to learn that the data was the real business all along is already out there collecting. Outro. Here is the lesson hiding inside a $6 billion collapse. The most valuable thing a company can own is no longer a factory or a product. It is you, turned into data, and most of us hand that over without reading a single line. 23andMe did not die for one simple reason. It died because falling demand, a one-time product, a broken trust breach, and a founder's iron grip all closed in at once. In the end, the only plan it had left depended on the very trust it had already lost. So here is the question worth sitting with. How many tubes, accounts, and sign-ups are you carrying right now where you are the product and nobody has told you yet? If a service you use vanished tomorrow, what would happen to what you gave it? Drop your answer below. and stay for the next collapse.